Welcome to Food Talk for Health. Here is your host, Tony King.
Thanks for tuning in. On Food Talk for Health, we talk about food as medicine, nutrition, holistic health and wellness, and a lot more. And each week, my guests share their knowledge and passion for what they do, and I'm happy to be able to share it. My guest today on Food Talk for Health is internationally renowned for his pioneering work in botanical and nutritional medicine, particularly in the field of integrative cancer. I'm so excited to have joining me today once again, Donnie Yance, clinical master herbalist and certified nutritionist. Ultimately, it's about our relationship with food, how it mirrors our relationship with ourselves. Cultivating respect, enjoyment, and balance in how we eat is the foundation of true nourishment. Food as medicine, that's a big topic, Donnie.
Absolutely.
How does the average person even understand how to approach it?
That's a great question. And I'll go back in my early years, and one of the first books I read on understanding how to implement food as a toolbox to improving our health was a book written by Pablo Arola called Are You Confused? And so let's just start right with there.
Yeah.
So even people are very confused about how to implement what foods. And I think the first step is to use wisdom. So wisdom is something ancient. So look at cultures throughout the world that we have greatly admired for their robust health. And start there, because that's wisdom. So people have done things for hundreds or thousands of years, often make sense, not just from the standpoint of foods that may taste good or foods that may grow locally, but also foods that seem to fit from a standpoint of nourishing their bodies. And so wisdom, as Einstein says, the intuitive mind or imagination is the sacred gift. The rational mind, which is this concept of how we go on the internet and learn, or knowledge and scientific papers and all of that, that should always be serving wisdom. So you start with wisdom. Does this make sense? Does it make sense to manipulate food that has been provided for us and people have been eating in this certain way for hundreds or thousands of years? Because every time we do something to food, we're more often than not making the food less healthy for us, even when our intent is to do something good. For example, we decide that fat's the villain, 30 some years ago, low fat, no fat, da da
Right.
da da, no salt, they went to no salt diets, all of a sudden all over the cans of the store, salt free, salt free. And so we do these radical things, or brand, refine all the grains and make white flour, processed white flour, and then, oh, we're all constipated. Let's now take the bran that we took out of the food and have people start eating bran cereal. So when you look at this, none of this makes sense. And so you start with wholeness. You start with things that people have done, that our ancestors have done, and you try to eat food as close to how it comes out of the ground as humanly possible, with the least amount of processing. And then you add more common sense. How do you do food combining? What makes sense? Diversity makes sense. And there isn't one single food in and of itself, maybe other than a potato, that we can actually live on. So it's like you want to start to think about balanced and harmony, and putting, as Ben Franklin says, a place for everything, everything in its place. So food isn't something like, oh, this food is great. Garlic is great for you, but you wouldn't sit down and eat a plate of garlic. So everything has to kind of fit into its place. And then that's the beauty of eating and making food healthy. And then things start to at that point become broken down into different categories, and like how do people know what to eat? Well, certain things are common sense again, like what foods do you like to eat? So
Right.
it's like you don't want to start, you don't want to be miserable eating foods because you think they're, like you want to live forever and I got to change my diet because that's more
Right.
important, and you're miserable. So you have to start with what taste buds you have, what things you like. Try to adapt that to the healthiest way possible, but don't ignore certain aspects of your culture or certain aspects of your family and how they want to eat. Just keep trying to tweak things and make things as healthy as possible, as whole food as possible. Then you start to get into things like, I don't know, tradition. I'm Italian, so I like Italian and Mediterranean food. That just happens to be healthy food for the most part. So I'll eat mostly in that genre, but I'll occasionally say, well, I want, tonight I want something more Asian. So I'll go to, I'll go more to that food, but I always kind of circle back to Mediterranean and more Italian flavored type of food. You can look at things like what's called your constitution. We all have different body types. We all have different ways metabolically that we're set up. Say someone is very cold constitution. Well, you don't want to throw a bunch of damp food in that person because they're already cold. So, you might want to think about warming foods, and then we can get specific about things too if you want. Maybe somebody has kidney stones, then you want to have foods that help them with that. You want to add a lot of lemon juice and apple cider vinegar and things that help dissolve a kidney stone. Make the diet rich in magnesium, make the diet very alkaline. These are all things, reduce the amount of, maybe animal protein, and then add a few herbal formulas, and all of a sudden your kidney stones are all gone. So maybe someone's anemic, maybe they're iron anemic. They need to eat foods that address their anemia. They can't often get away with being vegan, even though they may want to be vegan, but it's going to make them very unhealthy because they're iron deficient. So maybe the environment makes a difference. Someone living in a tropical area is not going to eat the same way someone living in Alaska is going to eat. Maybe how you want to eat in the summertime is different than how you want to eat in the fall, and you want to keep adapting your diet. You want to eat differently as the fall comes. It's common sense. All of a sudden, apples and pears are available. They're not available,
Right.
in June or July. And these are good things. Rooted vegetables become available. Our squashes, our winter squashes become available. And these are really good for our health to help us adapt to the colder climate.
There's not one size that fits everybody.
Absolutely not. No,
Right.
but you always start with quality and balance. That's the biggest thing. And then you always work to be 90% perfect. So I don't want anyone to think that they need to be 100% perfect with how they eat. We all should have a little bit of wiggle room to fit a couple of things that, sinful foods may be in, but still make those the best quality. And even what we quote unquote called sin foods, often, if they're high quality and they're moderation, they not only are not harmful for our body, but they can actually be additive to our body. Things like dark chocolate, things like coffee. Some people might think they're not good. We don't want to be eating chocolate as a meal, but finishing a meal with a little piece of dark chocolate not only is non-harmful to our body, but adds tremendous health benefits as well. So again, think of this concept of a place for everything, everything in its place, you know, and that's the way you want to start to build out your diet.
It's interesting how the marketing of food can really play a role in this. People are looking at the front of a bottle of something, and then it's reaching out to you saying, this is all natural. This is really good for you. And then you turn it around and you read the labels and you realize you can't even pronounce half the names. It's hard sometimes for folks to figure out what to eat, what will work. And I'm wondering if you have any ideas or where we can direct folks as to getting the best approach to finding out what will help their ailments.
Well, it depends a little bit on their ailments outside of the fact, like I like an 80 to 80% plant-based diet. So you don't have to go fanatical. Like one person says I'm going vegan, another person's going keto. Just throw all that stuff out the window and start with most people do very well on an 80 to 85% plant-based diet. That leaves 15 to 20% for people to choose from animal foods, or I'm a pesca vegetarian. So I have dairy products, eggs, fish, but I choose not to eat in any meat. But you can include meat in that 15 to 20% category. So again, this is understanding how much of each thing you want to have. So you kind of start with that. And even that's a little bit adaptable as well, depending on the individual. So you go back to, try not to get swayed by, the commercialization of food and think a little bit deeper. Put yourself out in nature, walk out in nature. When you bond with nature, go for a walk, around where I live, I can go for a walk and find a lot of wild food. You can find nettles growing, you can find all kinds of wild berries, up in the mountains here. Huckleberries I saw not too long ago, a bunch of huckleberries, and it's just so uh, intuitive in our true nature and in our true nature to relate to that food and start to think of food as a relationship, because when we ingest food, there's this beautiful bathing that takes place. Our microbiome, our gut health, everything gets into our gut, and then our gut has to decide how to take this food and what percentage of this food it's going to let into the bloodstream and permeate throughout the body and bathe with our organs, bathe with our cells, and eventually bathing with our molecules, because that's we are what we eat, but we really are what we absorb. So because the gut has to absorb things, and the beautiful thing is that many of the medicinal compounds and what we call nanonutrition. So when people think of eating, the first thing they think about is macro. That's all, and they don't usually go deeper than macro. So what that means is that how much protein, fats, and carbohydrates am I getting? Well, maybe that's a nice starting point, but it's not a very good approach to understanding how to eat well. So you can use that as a starting point. Then we go to micro understanding, micro as well. How many vitamins and minerals are in this food that I need to have for good health? Am I getting enough vitamins and minerals? And we know that our food is very depleted in certain nutrients: magnesium, zinc, selenium. These are things that typically in the American diet don't provide adequate amounts of. But the last category to go into is nanonutrition, which is small micro amounts of these hundreds of different compounds present in food and spices and in herbs. And some of those are called phenolic compounds, flavonoids. They're what give, like, say, berries their color, that beautiful purple and blue color. You have terpenes, you have sterols, you have lignans. And so there's this whole other world of understanding. And when you eat more wild food, you get a lot more of those, because the food that has to adapt to the environment has to develop more of what's called secondary metabolites. And when we ingest wild food or food that's been less cultivated or hybrided, like when you go and buy an apple, try to not think about buying, a delicious apple. Look at some in the fall, some of those heirloom varieties, because you're going to get much more of this nanonutrition from those foods than you would from that beautiful, delicious looking apple. So I think these are just different lenses to approach to understanding food, that and how to eat.
It's interesting how successful food as medicine can be. I recently interviewed two different women who just did two different cookbooks, and both of them had diseases that have been totally gone from completely changing their diet. And it was all food. Food is what cured them. And so it's just amazing that it really can happen if you put your energy and your whole soul behind it.
I actually have a book that I'm gonna probably have a publisher in the next month, I'd say. And it's actually called Food is Medicine. That's the title of the book. Applications in prostate and other cancers. Even though it's really my food Bible, my adaptogens
Sure.
and medical herbalism is really the totality of my way of thinking. At least it was, when I wrote it, some 10 years ago now. I keep evolving on how I see things, but in the way that I approach health, I see everything as a toolbox, and the beauty is to see the synchronicity and the oneness of combining many different modalities. And so, food as medicine is one of the toolboxes. Another toolbox is lifestyle as medicine. Another toolbox is herbal medicine. Another toolbox is supplemental nutritional medicine. And then another toolbox is modern medicine. And then the sixth toolbox is spiritual care as medicine, which is interwoven in all the five other types of five other toolboxes. And so each one does something that the other can't. So, as good as you can eat, often you're never going to get your vitamin D needs met. So we can't get enough vitamin D. We don't get enough sun anymore. So how do we meet that? Well, we probably need to supplement that. And so there is a role still in, to some degree of supplementation, but not something that ever should replace food as medicine. That's not the way you think. You don't think, well, that's not a good approach to thinking. You're just knowing that each toolbox provides us something that the other toolbox can't provide. And of course, in Mediri Care, which is the medical system that I've developed, I call herbal medicine the soul of the medicine. So, I have a great amount of respect and see in my 40 years of working with people that that herbal medicine has great contributions to not just helping with various conditions and diseases both acute and chronic people have, but just what it can do to optimize health, to keep us as healthy as possible as we're aging. So even at an older age, we can still be extremely robust and healthy.
Do you think genetics plays a part in any of this?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. But how do genetics develop? They usually develop from ancestry, good and bad habits. For example, my cousin developed maybe 30 years ago chronic myelocytic leukemia. Well, that the genetic gene that induces that is called the Philadelphia chromosome, which he has. He inherited that from my grandfather, who came from Italy, and when they first landed here with my mother at like 3 years old, he died a year or two once they came to America because he was a tailor and he cleaned with benzene. And benzene is highly carcinogenic, and benzene is now specifically associated with inducing that genetic abnormality. So even genes are not just something that is abnormal for no reason. The gene abnormalities occur often because of things that have been done in the past from poor exposure or lifestyle factors. And so but we can't change our genes. And so, what can we do? Well, we can look into the window or the lens called epigenetics. So, epigenetics is the study of looking at the impact that food has and herbal medicine has on altering gene behavior. So, no matter what genes we're born with, we're usually not born with a disease. I mean, occasionally that can happen as a result of so many genetic insults, but most of the time, these abnormal genes or mutations in those genes, and there's often what's referred to as a single copy or double copy. In other words, if you're heterozygous with a genetic abnormality, you've inherited a bad gene from mom or dad. If you're homozygous, you've inherited that gene from both mom and dad, and that's much more impactful and often needs to be mitigated by something if you want to not have that come to fruition on inducing some kind of disease over a lifetime. But you can do something about genes by affecting their behavior, and that's a study called epigenetics. And by eating these foods, so food can impact genes positively and negatively. So eating the wrong foods can actually accelerate those abnormal genes to induce disease. And the opposite is true. Eating the right foods, foods that impact, and using certain spices and herbs, and like broccoli sprouts are amazing for altering a lot of cell behavior and mitigating these factors. Most of the time, it comes to like these plant foods that have a great impact across the board. Certain plants are more specific for certain gene abnormalities, but we don't really have time to get into that detail. But I'll mention one very common abnormality that most people, if they're in the health field, they're often tested for, and it's called the MTHFR polymorphisms. And so many, holistic doctors and will be testing for that. And in my opinion, they overcompensate. They provide supplementation that tries to correct that, or but they overcorrect it because again, we're born with our genes. We don't want to over support our body because then we're not supporting anymore. We're doing something for the body. We don't want to do that. No matter what our genes are, we adapt to who we are. And but if we give a little bit of support, that's the best way because we're still enabling our body to do the work it does. So in other words, if you eat more fruits and vegetables, then you can mitigate that MTHFR polymorphism. You can take what's called a low dose of methyl donors to do added support. But most doctors see these abnormalities, don't even look at the health of the person, and says, "Oh my gosh, you have an MTHFR polymorphism. You need to be going on this, these high dose methyl donors to alleviate that." I'm not in the school that you need to jump on, those things necessarily. Maybe very low dosages of those to again assist the body, because I believe the best way to help the body is really to be supportive and not overcompensate. And so it's a little different philosophy than most people in my field.
So, in your upcoming book, are you going to have any good recipes? Any good food
Absolutely.
suggestions?
Somewhere between 70 and 100 recipes will be in that
Wow.
book.
I can't wait to talk to you
Including
about
things
that.
like my smoothie recipe, because I do a big I call medicinal smoothie to kind of start my day. So I'm going to give my smoothie recipe and little additives that you can add into the smoothie for certain things that you might want to do for added benefit as well. And there'll be lots of, I call the book like the way that I eat, even though I'm
Right.
gearing it towards prostate and cancer. I have a lot of mention in the book. Well, this is protective against heart disease and reduces all-cause mortality eating this way, like olives and olive oil. Good, great against prostate and other cancers, but just great against heart disease and great against all the chronic diseases we're facing, arthritis and osteoporosis and all of the things that people see coming up as they're getting older and older. Neurological health, dementia, Alzheimer's, all these foods are good against all of those conditions because I believe in health optimization. That's what I really do. I want to see how healthy I can make people. And then if I need to do topical things to on top of that to add to because there's still some manifestation of their condition or the disease, then I'll do that. But first, I want to build the root system of health up, the core of our life force, and see once we build that core up, how healthy we become as a result of that. And just
And
like
that,
you said, you had your two previous women on that have written books, and they both
yeah.
had diseases that food played a central role of them getting better.
It's just so important. And it's also really important to have a place to go to educate ourselves for that. So a book like yours sounds very exciting because not only are we learning about the different things that we can do, but we're also getting suggestions in a real life fashion of how to put it together in our kitchen to eat it.
Yeah, everything. All the sweeteners are covered in there. All like even food preparation, sometimes the best way. And again, a lot of it comes to common sense, things that
Right.
people have done. And I, recommend certain things for certain times of year. So like, for example, in prostate cancer, pomegranates are really inhibitory, and so is citrus fruit. So as you move into pomegranate and citrus season, the winter time and, late November, December, I will recommend people to juice pomegranates and oranges together. And it's a delicious juice. If you've ever been to Israel on corners, they have stands that do that naturally for
Ooh.
you. Just drink it. It's delicious and it's so health promoting. Pomegranates loaded with all of these incredible medicinal compounds, most notably one called ellagic acid, but many other phenolic compounds present in pomegranates. And citrus has an array of nutrients as well. from terpenes like limonene to pectin. The pectin in citrus is very, very resistant to disease, to, again, a lot of the flavonoids in there as well. So, you're bathing yourself with these incredible phytonutrients, and it's delicious. Pomegranate
And
and
that's the
orange
number
juice
one
tastes
thing.
delicious. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think sometimes we can get overwhelmed by so much information being thrown out there to people. That's the problem, is that you don't know what to believe.
Yeah, I recommend people to take their time, again, and to think of eating like something they can embrace their entire lifespan, not something that they're just going to do, to lose a few pounds, because we already know that diets don't work, and your body doesn't like to do things radically, and it's a big push to do, modified fasting, and that's okay if it's working for you. I don't say no to that. I don't think it's harmful. But I also don't do it myself, so I don't promote it. I can't tell anyone to do something that isn't the way that I live my life. I try to live, exemplify first and foremost how to be. And here I am, 66, never have been to a doctor, I've never taken a single medication whatsoever. I've never had any ailment whatsoever. And
Wow.
so I,
Good for
and I'm,
you.
I'm healthy as I was 30 years ago. And not to say that I'm not really interested in living forever or anything like that. I don't think about it that way. I just embrace this way of living that really works for me and in every way. And so that's what you want to ask yourself. And it has to work for you. And if you have and really think about what you're eating, what you're putting in your stomach. I don't tolerate people that eat on the run, that are used to like not being aware of the relationship. They're doing other things when they should be eating. Because I'd say the most important thing is to understand the relationship between the gut and the brain, or in particular the vagus nerve. So if you don't activate your vagus nerve, you're going to have problems with your gut health. You're going to have problems with your nutrition, and ultimately you're going to have digestive tract problems, which run rampant. The proton pump inhibitors like Nexium, 38 million Americans are taking PPIs. I consider them one of the top five most dangerous drugs for people to take. And they're just passed out like they're nothing. I'll just take your 20, 40 milligrams of your PPI, and you won't feel any pain, when you eat. Basically, that's what they do. They basically shut everything down,
Wow.
and you don't produce any acid. You don't absorb any nutrients. They're associated with pretty much every disease, osteoporosis to diabetes to many forms of cancer. They're very addictive, very dangerous, and people just don't realize, there's a relationship. Your vagus nerve is called rest and digest, which means if you're not relaxed, you shouldn't even eat. Being Italian, and our ancestors would always sit down at a table and, spend an hour or two eating a meal, and
Absolutely.
and talking and taking their time, taking a sip of wine here and doing this. That's as important to your health as what you're putting in your body.
It's
So
it's
how you
probably
eat.
why a lot of the Mediterranean people live so long, because they can spend 3 and 4 hours at the table before they even get up.
Absolutely. I mean, it's how we're programmed to live that way, and we've
Yeah.
forgotten that. So I always tell people, I want to know. I don't want to know what you don't eat, because that's how people say things. Well, I'm on a gluten-free diet. Well, big deal. That could be less healthy for you in the diet than you were doing before, but it might be more healthy.
Right.
And I'm not,
Right.
I don't eat this, I don't eat that. I said, stop. Don't tell me what you don't eat. Tell me what you eat. That's what I want to know. And then I want to know when you eat, why you eat, how you eat. I want to know all of those things as much. And I can tell you, I have fixed so many digestive problems by telling people you are not allowed to eat until you sit down and relax and eat and chew slowly. And that's all I tell them. And all of a sudden, all these foods they thought they couldn't eat, they can start eating now. So it's like you got to activate your vagus nerve to expect the energy, because everything's a facilitation of energy, for the energy to be available to go to your stomach, heat your stomach up. Think of your stomach as a furnace. That's what it is. If you throw a bunch of food in and it didn't heat up, it smolders. And then, oh, I'm bloated, I'm this and that. Yeah, yeah, you're damp, your whole stomach is filled with dampness. You've got to give it the time. And, again, being raised by an Italian mother, I'm drinking wine and chamomile tea like as a little baby, like I drink a little sip of wine with our dinner, watered down wine. And then after dinner, we'd all have chamomile tea. And so what is chamomile good for? Great for digestion, but isn't it? It's also really well known to be an incredible
Relaxing.
relaxant. And now
Yes.
there's tremendous scientific validation on the health benefits of chamomile. And we can look at it through that nutrigenetic lens because chamomile is the richest source of a phytonutrient called Apigeum, which has got all this life extension. They sell it as an isolate. I said, you don't need to take the isolate. Take chamomile. You'll get plenty of it. Like 2% of chamomile is Apigeum. And then you get all the other nutrients. And so chamomile has human research on it, reducing anxiety, helping all kinds of digestion ailments. And yet it's such a simple thing to do, and so these are things like, after you eat, you should have a little, I prescribe, again, being Italian, I prescribe it a tiny bit of an aperitif to people sometimes that don't have a good appetite, elderly people. I say, take a little Campari. You don't have to take a lot, just a little
Right.
splash and put a little soda water. And I just want you to start sipping it a few minutes before you're going to eat. All of a sudden, they're more hungry, their digestion activates, they eat better. And again, these are things that people traditionally have done.
It's funny, as you mentioned, having the wine. The same thing with me. My grandfather always gave us just a small little glass of
Yeah,
wine. I grew up with that, kid drinking wine, but we only had a little bit, and it was the wine that he made. So it's that
yeah,
whole Mediterranean upbringing, I think, that really, really plays a big part in
yeah,
how you are now.
absolutely.
We are talking with Donnie Yance, clinical master herbalist and certified nutritionist. Boy, it is just always a pleasure to chat with you. I can't wait for your next book, and I can't wait to talk about more food ideas. Where can we go to find out more information about everything in your world?
Well, my website is the first place I would recommend because that's how, my outreach to people, and so I have a lot of recipes and I'm doing a blog. You again being Italian, I'm going to do a blog soon on eggplant, all the
Ooh.
health benefits of eggplant. Which I've never seen anyone write on eggplant, but you're going to be blown away by how much great research there is on eggplant and how good it is for you. And I'm putting a recipe in there, my eggplant rollatini recipe actually in there.
I
So
can't
that's
wait.
DonnieYance.com, DonnieYance.com. So that's one place. My foundation and my clinic and my school is all under the umbrella called Mediri, Medri, which is the root word for medicine and medicinal, the Latin word Mediri, and Mediri Center, Mediri Foundation. You just think of Mediri Center and you'll find the whole what I'm doing in the realm of the clinical work, the research work and the education work. And then I have a product line of all my formulations, botanical nutritional formulas, and that's called Natura, Natura, Health Products, that company. And I have the highest quality formulations that you could ever imagine. Lastly,
Oh, go ahead.
because I know you're musical, I'll just say I'm
Yes,
a
yes,
musician.
yes.
I'm a jazz musician. I have two albums of all my own music. One is called Cosmic Force. The other is called Heaven Awaits. And I call it kind of very accessible, melodic jazz kind of, but very accessible music for people. Very unique because a lot of bass driven melody, bass and flute, bass and saxophone. But the music for the most part has this concept of being very, very beautiful. I try to make everything, really, really beautiful. So it's very, very good music. And I want to be on your music program at some point.
Oh, good, good, good. Donnie, I so much appreciate your time today. I know you're such a busy guy, so I feel pretty special even getting some of your time.
Thank you. Really wonderful to be with you.
You've been listening to Food Talk for Health with Tonya King. Thanks for joining us. Eat well to be well.
We hope you'll subscribe to this podcast. Thanks for listening to Food Talk for Health.